Good morning everyone, welcome to Our Small Footprint. My name is Nyssa, and if you're new here, we are a family of 8 who live off-grid in Australia. We do a 6 weekly grocery shop, and generally speaking, after that 6 weekly grocery shop, I try and do daily to every second daily videos showing what I'm cooking, how I'm using what I've bought, what's getting stored in the freezer, what's getting processed, all that sort of thing. I didn't manage to do it last month because we all came down with COVID. So I'm trying to get back into the habit of doing it this month for you. So this is the first day that I started recording, and it is a fairly straightforward day. We're still getting everything sorted into the fridges and stuff like that. So to start with, there's a lot of work that is not record worthy, whatever you want to call it. But this is, so I try and show most of the kitchen angles, and this was the first lot of significant kitchen angle. So today we made rice paper rolls using some of the chicken and the vegetables that we got. I had to get in early because the kids will eat all the fresh vegetables really quickly if they are given the opportunity. So I had to get in quick to be able to snag some cucumbers and some carrots and stuff to use in this meal. So it was what we had early on in the month. So rice paper rolls today and homemade dipping sauce, and enjoy watching, and I will see you again tomorrow with more. Thanks, guys. So one of the first things I did today was to marinate the chicken thighs. So I've been buying the frozen chicken thighs from the butcher, and they come in a box. It's 18 kilos for $49. So it works out at like $2 something per kilo. But then once you take the skin and the bones and stuff out, it works out about $5 a kilo, which is still pretty cheap. The ones that I buy from Costco that I bought this month are $10 a kilo. They're $9.99 a kilo. So they're almost twice the price, but there's no work behind it. And knowing how busy I was going to be this month, I decided that I was going to just buy these ones and try and be a little bit more mindful about using them, because the thing with the ones that you have to debone and take the skin off is that we were using less because of the effort required to remove the bones and stuff. So because we were having to do that, we were using less of them for that purpose, if that makes sense. So now that I've bought these ones, what I'm trying to do is be mindful about the quantity that we'll use, and not just using them however I wanted just because they were easy to use. So that is the aim with this month with these. But tonight's dinner is rice paper rolls, and the part of the reason I'm doing that is because the fresh vegetables required for them. So the first thing I did was I marinated the chicken thighs. I cut them up into strips because chicken thighs take a while to cook, so for quicker cooking I slice them up nice and thin, and I double check that there's no bones, shards in them while I'm doing it. Once I do that, I stick it all in a bowl. So I marinate most of my chicken in a very similar way. If you've seen me do it before, I sort of do it by eye. I use a mix of smoked paprika, some garlic powder or minced garlic, or whatever I've got handy, some ground up mustard seeds or made up mustard if I've made some mustard, and then I use onion powder, some salt, that sort of thing. I then also, in this particular batch, I added half a jar of the cowboy candy and some lemon juice, and then I massage it through the meat really well. So I just make sure that it's all evenly coloured and coated in the marinade. We're not going to leave it for any excessive amount of time. Most of what the flavour that you get from all this is when it's cooking off, and especially with that cowboy candy in there, you get this nice caramelisation of the meat when you stick it in the cast iron pan because of the sugars in the cowboy candy. So I find that it works really well. So that's my general rule of thumb when it comes to marinating chicken, and you'll probably see me do it a few times over the next few days. So then I was going to julienne the vegetables. I started with one of those julienne peelers, but I found it really difficult because of having to grip the vegetable and grip the peeler, because that's where my hands really struggle, is the pincer grip, the thumb to finger grip. So holding the carrot while trying to hold the peeler and drag it down just wasn't working very well. I do prefer these longer shreds rather than because I could use the KitchenAid drum grater and just grate it, but I really do prefer the longer shreds, longer pieces for this kind of a dish, because you want the texture of it in there. So I decided I'd just move to using a knife. I've got pretty good knife skills, so it doesn't take me very long, and I just slice it vertically down into strips and then cut that into more strips, so it's a bit like julienning it. Just they're a little less uniform, probably a little thicker, but it works really well. So that's what I did with these. It is all totally personal preference on the shape. Like, you can use a box grater, you could use a drum grater, you could cut them into whatever size and shape you want. It's really up to you. I did the cucumbers similarly. Now, I bought an entire box of cucumbers, and this is all the cucumbers that were left, which is partly why we're doing rice paper rolls tonight, because if I waited any longer, there would be no cucumbers left at all, and I really like cucumber in these. So I pulled them out and I cut them up very similar way to how I do the carrots, into long strips, because I find that that's the best for rice paper rolls. Well, that's how we like it the best with the rice paper rolls. So you can put any vegetables in here. You could put cabbage in here, you could put anything you wanted, but this was just the vegetables of choice for today. We also put the vermicelli rice noodles in. Again, you don't have to put them in there, but it's a bit of a filler, and with so many people eating the meal, it's a good thing to have that little bit of filler for us. It just makes it go that little bit further, so it's beneficial for us. So all I do is I put them in a bowl and I boil the kettle and I pour boiling water over them, and that softens them up and cooks them perfectly fine for using. And just put them aside with the hot water in them. I made a dipping sauce. I did a bit of a Google for different types of dipping sauces and things like that, and didn't really follow a recipe, which is pretty common for me. I just played it by ear and taste and that sort of thing. So I grabbed a jar. We had the end of a tub of peanut butter, so I just scraped the end of the peanut butter tub into the jar and then started adding flavors and testing it. So I did some fish sauce and some soy sauce, and I added some coconut cream, and I blended it all up and then tasted it. I then added a little bit of mirin because it needed a little bit of sweetness but a little bit more sour as well. So I just put a little bit of mirin in there because that was what I had handy. You could use Shaoxing wine or anything like that, just that extra little bit of tart and sour. And then I just blended it all up until it was all a uniform sort of a dipping sauce. We like it fairly thick, but you still need to be able to dip it, not spread it. So I did that up. I like to cut the rice noodles up a little bit. Normally I would use kitchen scissors, but I couldn't find them anywhere today for some reason, so I just used a knife. But I like to cut them into sort of shorter shreds for the benefit of eating, that you don't, when you go to bite your rice paper roll, you don't end up pulling half the filling out with the longer shreds, the longer pieces of the rice noodles. So if they're shorter, you tend to bite in and break it off, and it's just more efficient in my opinion. It makes for less potential wastage. So I cut them up as much as I felt necessary. I cooked off the chicken thighs. I didn't show that. So I cooked off the chicken thighs in batches. Obviously you don't want to overcrowd the pan, otherwise you're not going to get that nice caramelization. They're going to end up stewing in their own juices. So cooked it off in batches, and once it was all cooked and got a little bit cooler, I diced it up. Now you can always use these as strips in these rice paper rolls, that's fine. Where I'm all about trying to make food go a little bit further, so to make it go a little bit further, I cut it into pieces so that we can put a little bit less in each roll, but it still feels like they're full. So I just diced it up into pieces, and then I added some mayo that I'd just made. I made some mayo, made it fairly thin because we're just putting it through the chicken just to add a bit more moisture into the rice paper roll. So I just added some mayo and mixed that through the chicken so that we'd have that to use. In regards to the rice paper rolls, you can fry the rice paper rolls if you want, or you can eat them soft. We like them soft. We do like spring rolls, but the soft rice paper rolls are really nice too. So what I do is I use a bit of warm water and I place the dried rice paper roll into the water and then flip it over. Now most of them have this like pattern on them, and when you first add them to the water, that pattern goes sort of white. So if you flip it over a few times, that pattern goes translucent. You don't want to wet them so much that they're soggy because they will just stick together. So you want a little bit of rigidity to them still, just enough that you can handle it easier. Then when you put it down on the board, as you fill it, it's going to soften even more with the moisture from the filling, but also just from sitting there for a while. So err on the side of less is more with getting it soft. You can always let it sit a little bit longer rather than worrying about it being too wet, because if it's just too wet, it is just too hard to work with because it just sticks to itself. So there is a little bit of a learning curve to it, but once you get it down pat, it just seems to work fairly easily. So I had to make enough for everyone. Now, I have had a couple of comments on Facebook because I posted up a photo that I should make the kids and Darryl do their own. And yes, I probably should, but I feel like it would be so inefficient and there would be potential wastage and all the rest of it, and I'm just a little bit too much control there, I suppose. I like the food to stretch a certain distance, and I like the kids to eat all the vegetables and that, and if I make it and pass it to them, then they just eat it, whereas if they were choosing to do it themselves, they probably wouldn't put the same stuff in it, and there'd be too much meat in it and things like that. So anyway, I did them all. So by the end of doing them all, you do tend to get a little bit of a rhythm going, and they do work out a little bit better. But you can do them however you want in regards to layering. So you can layer it so that when they're rolled up, they look really pretty. And some people put like big pieces of coriander or mint or something in that, and it shows in the when they're rolled up, and it looks lovely. I don't really go to that much effort because I'm making too many and the kids don't appreciate it. So all I do is I put the rice noodles down about at the halfway mark, but towards you, and then I put a little line of chicken, and I put some shreds of the cucumber and some shreds of the carrot, and I take the end closest to me and fold it nice and tightly over the mound of filling and fold the sides in on a little bit of an angle so that they're going, as you're rolling, they're going to go in. It just is something that you keep on doing, and as you do it, it's going to get easier and easier. So once you've got them rolled, if you're making them in advance, they will stick to whatever surface you put them on. So I just sprayed with a little bit of olive oil before I put the rice paper rolls down, and that stops them sticking to the platter. If they do stick to the platter, you just have the risk of them tearing slightly as you pick them up, and it's a whole lot easier to eat if they're all in one piece than if they're torn. So I tend to just put a tiny bit of oil on the platter where I'm serving them, just to stop them from sticking to that platter. That's just my personal preference though. So by the end of the time that I had been doing it, so I've done all the kids' ones and I'm now on to doing ours. This is a bit of a closer look at a fairly well rolled one. So the ones at the beginning weren't as nice and neat and tidy, and by the end of it I got a lot better. So it's just a matter of making a judgment call on how much filling to put in them for a start, because if you overfill them then they're hard to roll, but if you underfill them then you're rolling them too much, and that's not as pleasant either. So this was about perfect. The amount of filling that's in them and the rolling style, they were nice and firm and tight, they held together and they looked attractive. Again, I could go to more effort, but it's not really my thing to go to extreme effort for the look of the food. I like my food, you do eat with your eyes, not just with your mouth, but I like it to look appealing but not necessarily fancy. So this was what I did, and I just served it on a plate, the rice paper rolls on the plate and a little dipping bowl with the sauce. I actually took a teaspoon with me when I was doing mine, and I spooned over the sauce on the top of the rice paper rolls rather than dipping them into the sauce, because I found that I always lose filling into the sauce that way. So I take a teaspoon and I put a little bit of the sauce on the top of the rice paper roll and then bite it off and then add a little bit of sauce, a bit like when you buy a sausage roll from the service station and you have the little squeezy tomato sauces and you squeeze a little bit on and you eat it. That sort of a process. I definitely found that was easier for me. So I hope you enjoyed that, and that gives you something else to try for meals. It's super simple, it's inexpensive, and you can put whatever you want in them, and they can be vegetables only rather than meat too. They're a little bit time consuming, a little bit fiddly, but you do get a bit of a rhythm going and it's not too bad, and you can always make them roll their own. Just set up the bowls and they can roll their own. Thank you for joining me again today, and I will see you again tomorrow.